What happens when a defendant walks into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom and utters the words every judge fears most? I know where you live. The silence that followed would become the most talked about moment in courtroom television history. But what Judge Caprio did next, nobody saw it coming. Not the defendant, not the packed gallery, not even the court officers reaching for their radios. If you've ever wondered what true courage looks like in the face of a direct threat, you need to hear this story. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what unfolds in the next few minutes will restore your faith in the justice system. Drop a comment below telling us what you would do if someone threatened you in your own workplace. Because that's exactly what happened to this 78-year-old judge on a cold Tuesday morning in Providence, Rhode Island. The date was March 15, 2023. Case number 2023 CROO 4756. The courtroom was already packed by 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before proceedings were scheduled to begin. Judge Caprio, wearing his signature black robe and the reading glasses that had become iconic to millions of viewers worldwide, was reviewing case files in his chambers. He had no idea that the day would test every principle he'd stood for during his 43 years on the bench. Like this video if you believe judges deserve our protection and respect, because what happened next crossed every line. The defendant's name was Marcus Anthony Brewster, 32 years old, 6'3", 240 pounds of barely contained rage wrapped in an oversized black hoodie with white drawstrings, dark jeans torn at both knees, and Timberland boots that squeaked against the polished courtroom floor as he walked. Marcus had a record, not just any record. 17 prior arrests, 9 convictions, assault, battery, threatening, disorderly conduct. He'd spent 68 months of his adult life behind bars, and from the look in his dark eyes that morning, he was ready to add more time if it meant making his point. The charge that brought Marcus to Judge Caprio's courtroom was relatively minor compared to his history. Parking violations. 17 unpaid tickets totaling $4,260. Most people would just pay the fine or work out a payment plan. But Marcus wasn't most people. He'd already been to court twice before on these same tickets. Each time, different judges had granted him extensions. Each time, he'd failed to pay a single dollar. This was his third appearance, and the court's patience had run thin. Judge Caprio had a reputation. Anyone who watched Caught in Providence knew it. Compassionate, understanding, willing to reduce fines for struggling families, known for dismissing tickets when defendants showed genuine hardship. He'd forgiven hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines over the years. Little old ladies who couldn't afford groceries, single fathers working 3 jobs, immigrants sending money back home to sick relatives. The judge had heard every story, and his heart had grown more tender with age. Not harder. Share this video with someone who needs to see that compassion still exists in our courts. Because what made this confrontation so shocking wasn't just the threat itself, but the collision between Marcus's rage and Judge Caprio's legendary kindness. Court Officer Daniel Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran who'd worked with Judge Caprio for over a decade, was stationed near the judge's bench that morning. At 51 years old, Daniel had seen everything, or so he thought. His hand rested casually on his duty belt as Marcus was called forward. Case clerk Jennifer Matthews, 43, with auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, read the case number into the record. Her voice was steady, professional, revealing nothing of the concern she'd felt when she'd reviewed Marcus's file that morning and saw the escalating pattern of aggressive behavior in his previous court appearances. Case 2023 CROO 4756, State of Rhode Island versus Marcus Anthony Brewster, 17 counts of parking violation non-payment. Judge Caprio looked up from his notes, his brown eyes settling on Marcus with that characteristic mixture of curiosity and grandfatherly warmth that had made him famous. "Good morning, Mr. Brewster. Please approach the bench." Marcus moved forward, his boots making that rhythmic squeak, squeak, squeak against the floor. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed courtroom. 47 people sat in the gallery that morning. Court observers, journalism students from Providence College. Other defendants waiting their turn. A local news reporter named Sarah Chen, 29, who'd come to do a feature story on Judge Caprio's compassionate approach to justice. Sarah's iPhone sat in her lap, recording app running, capturing audio she'd later wish she hadn't heard. "Mr. Brewster, I see you've been here twice before on these violations." Judge Caprio began, his voice calm, without judgment. "And I see that you haven't made any payments toward the fines. Can you help me understand what's going on? Are you employed? Drop a comment telling us if you've ever struggled to pay a fine or ticket, because financial hardship is real, and Judge Caprio understood that better than anyone." But what Marcus said next had nothing to do with hardship. "I ain't paying nothing," Marcus said, his voice low and hard. "Those tickets are bullshit. That whole street is a trap. They just trying to get money from people." Judge Caprio nodded slowly, his expression unchanged. He'd heard this argument before. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Brewster. But the signs are clearly posted. You parked in a 2-hour zone and left your vehicle there for extended periods on multiple occasions. The parking enforcement officers were just doing their jobs." "Their jobs?" Marcus's voice rose, and several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Officer Rodriguez's hand moved slightly closer to his radio. "Their jobs is harassing people. That's what their job is." "I hear you," Judge Caprio said, maintaining his characteristic patience. "But we still have to address these violations. Now, you've had 2 extensions already. The court has been very accommodating. What I'd like to do today is set up a payment plan that works for your budget. How much can you afford to pay per month?" This was the moment when things could have gone differently, if Marcus had accepted the offer, if he'd shown even a hint of cooperation, if he'd recognized the extraordinary patience Judge Caprio was showing. But Marcus had come to court that day with something else on his mind. "I told you I ain't paying nothing," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a threatening register that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. "And if you try to make me, you gonna regret it." The courtroom went silent. That particular kind of silence that feels like pressure in your ears. Judge Caprio's expression didn't change, but Officer Rodriguez moved 2 steps closer, his entire posture shifting. "Mr. Brewster, I'm going to advise you to be very careful about what you say next," Judge Caprio said quietly. "Threatening a judge is a serious offense. Like this video, if you believe threatening anyone, let alone a judge, is completely unacceptable, because what happened next crossed from disrespect into criminal territory." Marcus leaned forward, placing both hands on the defendant's table. His knuckles were scarred, the hands of someone who'd solved too many problems with violence. "I ain't threatening nobody. I'm just saying. You live on Heritage Drive, don't you? Nice house, real nice. I seen it." The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Rodriguez's hand went to his radio immediately. Jennifer Matthews stopped typing mid-word, her fingers frozen above her keyboard. In the gallery, Sarah Chen's reporter instincts kicked in. She was already mentally composing the lead paragraph of a story she never wanted to write. Judge Caprio sat completely still for 3 full seconds. To the people watching, it felt like 3 minutes. His face revealed nothing. Not fear, not anger, not surprise. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but filled with something that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. "Officer Rodriguez, please approach the bench." Daniel moved forward instantly, positioning himself between Marcus and the judge. "Your Honor?" "I want you to know something, Mr. Brewster," Judge Caprio said, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "You're absolutely right. I do live on Heritage Drive. Number 247. It's a white colonial with black shutters and a red door. My wife planted tulips in the front garden last fall. They should be coming up any week now. She's very proud of those tulips." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. Nobody understood where the judge was going with this. "I've lived in that house for 37 years, Judge Caprio continued. "My children grew up there. My grandchildren visit every Sunday for dinner. My wife makes lasagna. Her grandmother's recipe. The whole neighborhood smells like garlic and basil on Sunday afternoons. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this unfolds, because Judge Caprio's response is about to shock everyone in that courtroom. Marcus's expression shifted, confusion mixing with his anger. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. Judges were supposed to get scared when you showed them you knew personal information. They were supposed to back down, maybe reduce your fine, let you walk. They weren't supposed to confirm the information and talk about tulips. "You seem to have done your research on me, Mr. Brewster," Judge Caprio said. "So let me do some on you." Marcus Anthony Brewster, born April 3, 1991, raised on the South Side. Mother's name Maria Brewster, works as a home health aide. Father left when you were 6. You have 2 younger sisters, Destiny and Keisha. Destiny graduated from nursing school last year. Keisha is studying criminal justice at Community College of Rhode Island. Your mother is very proud of them. Marcus's face went pale. How did the judge know all this? Your first arrest was at age 16. Judge Caprio continued, his voice taking on a different quality. Not threatening, but heavy with something that felt like sadness. Shoplifting. You stole a birthday card and a small toy. Do you remember what the toy was? Marcus said nothing, but his jaw tightened. It was a plastic dinosaur, a stegosaurus. Your younger sister Keisha was turning 7, and you wanted to give her something. Your mother was working double shifts, and there was no money for birthday presents. Am I remembering that correctly? Share this with someone who needs to understand that judges are human beings who actually read case files and care about people's stories. Because what Judge Caprio was doing was something no one expected. He wasn't just reciting facts from a file. He was showing Marcus that he'd taken time to understand him as a human being. The judge at your juvenile hearing was Judge Patricia Hurst. Caprio continued. She's retired now. Lives in Florida. But I spoke with her last night after I'd read your file. Do you know what she told me? Marcus's hands had begun to shake slightly. The rage that had fueled him moments before was being replaced by something else. Confusion. Maybe the beginning of shame. She told me that you were one of the brightest kids she'd ever seen in her courtroom. She said you had potential. She offered you a diversion program, community service, counseling, a chance to clear your record when you turned 18. Do you remember what you told her? The courtroom was transfixed. This wasn't typical courtroom procedure. This was something else entirely. You told her thank you, Judge Caprio said softly. You shook her hand. You promised you'd do better. And for 2 years, you did. You finished high school. You got a job at the warehouse on Cranston Street. You were helping your mother with rent. And then something happened. Judge Caprio paused, shuffling through papers on his bench until he found what he was looking for. May 14th, 2011. You were 20 years old. You were walking home from work. Corner of Broad Street in public. 11:37 p.m. 3 men approached you. There was an altercation. You were stabbed twice, once in the shoulder, once in the side. The side wound punctured your lung. You nearly died. Drop a comment below if you're starting to understand that every person in a courtroom has a story that led them there, because Marcus's story was about to intersect with Judge Caprio's in a way no one could have predicted. The men who stabbed you were never caught, Judge Caprio continued. You spent 2 weeks in Rhode Island Hospital. When you got out, something had changed. Your first arrest as an adult came 3 months later. Assault. You put a man in the hospital. You told the judge at that hearing that you weren't going to be a victim anymore, that you'd never let anyone hurt you again. Marcus's eyes were glistening now, though whether from anger or emerging tears was unclear. Since then, Mr. Brewster, you've been arrested 16 more times. You've spent more than 5 years in prison. You've lost jobs, relationships, opportunities. And now you're standing in my courtroom, $4,200 in debt for parking tickets you refuse to pay, threatening me because you think I'm just another person trying to hurt you. Just another person who doesn't see you as human. Officer Rodriguez stood perfectly still, his hand no longer on his radio. He'd worked with Judge Caprio long enough to recognize what was happening. This wasn't a judge cowing to a threat. This was something much more powerful. But here's what you need to understand, Mr. Brewster, Judge Caprio said. his voice taking on a firmer edge. "When you threatened me just now, when you told me you know where I live, you didn't just threaten me. You threatened my wife, Joan. She's 76 years old. She has arthritis in both knees and high blood pressure. She can't run. She can't defend herself." Like this video if you believe threats against innocent family members are cowardly and unacceptable. Because Judge Caprio was about to make a point that would resonate far beyond that courtroom. "You threatened my daughter Michelle, who stops by every Tuesday to check on us, because we're getting older and she worries. You threatened my son David, who brings his kids over so their grandfather can teach them to play chess on the front porch of that house you've apparently visited. You threatened my grandchildren, Marco and Sophia, ages 8 and 6, who think their grandfather is the safest person in the world." Marcus's head dropped slightly. The adrenaline that had carried him into this confrontation was draining away, leaving something hollow in its wake. "So now we have a choice to make, Mr. Brewster," Judge Caprio said. "Officer Rodriguez can arrest you right now for threatening a public official. That's a felony. Given your record, you'd be looking at 3 to 5 years in prison. Or we can do something different." The courtroom held its collective breath. Even Sarah Chen in the gallery had stopped taking notes, completely absorbed in what was unfolding. "I want to tell you a story," Judge Caprio said, settling back in his chair. "When I was a young lawyer, just starting out, I had a case that changed my life. My client was a man named Robert Delgado. He'd been charged with armed robbery. He had a record, not unlike yours. The evidence against him was substantial. He was looking at 15 years. Hit subscribe if you want to hear how this story connects to Marcus, because Judge Caprio's past was about to illuminate a path forward no one expected. But I believed Robert when he told me he was innocent. I worked that case for 8 months. I interviewed witnesses. I tracked down alibi evidence. I found security footage that the police had missed. And eventually, I proved that Robert wasn't just innocent of that particular crime. He'd been in church. Church, Mr. Brewster. He had 17 witnesses who'd seen him at Wednesday night services the night of the robbery. The charges were dropped. Robert walked free. And do you know what he did?" Judge Caprio paused, making sure Marcus was listening. 2 weeks later, he robbed a convenience store. Different victim. Same MO. He got caught. He went to prison for 12 years. And I had to face the reality that I'd helped put a guilty man back on the streets, where he'd hurt someone else. Marcus looked up, meeting the judge's eyes for the first time since the confrontation began. "I was devastated," Judge Caprio said. "I questioned everything, my judgment, my ability to read people, whether I should even practice law. But then something happened that taught me the most important lesson of my career. Robert's victim, the woman whose store he'd robbed the second time, her name was Elena Martinez. She came to see me. Drop a comment telling us if you've ever forgiven someone who hurt you, because this is where the story takes an unexpected turn." Elena asked me why I was taking Robert's second crime so personally. Judge Caprio continued. She said, "You didn't make him rob my store. He made that choice. But you know what? You gave him a chance to make a different choice first. The fact that he didn't take it isn't your failure, it's his. But the fact that you offered it? That's your success." I never forgot that conversation, Mr. Brewster, because Elena taught me that our job as human beings isn't to predict the future. It's to offer people the chance to write a better one. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of someone in the gallery quietly crying. Marcus's shoulders had begun to shake. "So here's what I'm going to do," Judge Caprio said, leaning forward. "I'm not going to have you arrested for threatening me. Not today. Instead, I'm going to make you an offer. And you're going to have to decide, right here, right now, what kind of man you want to be. Share this video with someone who's ever been at a crossroads in their life, because Marcus was about to face the most important choice of his adult life. I'm going to reduce your fines from $4,200 to $1,000, Judge Caprio said, and I'm going to give you 12 months to pay it. $84 a month. That's less than $3 a day. I believe you can afford that." Marcus's head came up, confusion clear on his face. "But there are conditions," Judge Caprio continued, his voice hardening slightly. "First, you're going to write a letter of apology. Not to me, to my wife. to my children, to my grandchildren, to every member of my family whose safety you threatened when you made your statement today. And those letters will be real, specific, honest, not some generic "I'm sorry" that you bang out in 10 minutes. Second, you're going to attend anger management counseling, 1 session per week for 6 months. I'm going to require documentation from your counselor. Miss 1 session, this deal is void. Third, you're going to complete 100 hours of community service. But not just any community service. You're going to volunteer at Rhode Island Hospital. The same hospital where you were treated after you were stabbed. You're going to see what it's like on the other side. What it's like to help people instead of threatening them. Like this video if you believe in second chances backed by accountability, because Judge Caprio was building a framework for genuine transformation. Fourth, and this is non-negotiable, if you're arrested for anything, and I mean anything, even jaywalking, during the next 12 months, you'll be brought back before me. And at that point, I'll impose the maximum sentence for threatening a public official, plus the full amount of your original fines, plus whatever new charges you've accumulated. Do you understand? Quote. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Tears were now openly running down his face, cutting tracks through what looked like several days of stubble. But here's the 5th condition, Mr. Brewster, and this is the most important one, Judge Caprio said, his voice softening again. Once a month for the next 6 months, you're going to come back to this courtroom, not for a hearing, not because you're in trouble, but to sit in that gallery and watch. I want you to see other people standing where you're standing right now. I want you to see that you're not the only person struggling, not the only person angry, not the only person who feels like the system is against them. And I want you to see how they make their choices. The judge paused, pulling off his reading glasses and setting them on the bench. Because, Mr. Brewster, that's what this comes down to. Choices. You've had a hard life. You've been dealt some terrible cards. You've been hurt, betrayed, traumatized. I acknowledge all of that. But those experiences don't get to define the rest of your life unless you let them. And threatening me today, that was you letting them define you. Hit subscribe because what Judge Caprio says next became the most shared quote from any courtroom in 2023. You told me you know where I live, Judge Caprio said. Well, now I'm telling you something. I know where you live too, not your address. I mean, I know where you live emotionally, psychologically. I know what it's like to be angry, to feel like the world is against you, to want to lash out because it feels like the only way to feel powerful. I've been alive for 78 years, Mr. Brewster. You think I haven't felt those things? But here's what I learned that you haven't learned yet. Real power isn't in threats. It's not in making people afraid of you. Real power is in making the choice to be better than your worst moment. Real power is standing in front of a judge who has every right to send you to prison and deciding to accept help instead. That's courage, Mr. Brewster. Are you brave enough to accept my offer? Quote. The question hung in the air. Marcus stood motionless, his hands gripping the edge of the defendant's table. Officer Rodriguez remained ready, though his posture had relaxed slightly. The gallery waited. Sarah Chen's hand hovered over her phone, torn between documenting this moment and feeling like she was intruding on something too personal for recording. I need an answer, Mr. Brewster, Judge Caprio said gently, right now, because this offer expires the moment you walk out of this courtroom. Will you accept my conditions? Drop a comment below predicting what Marcus did next. Because the choice he made in that moment would ripple forward in ways no one could predict. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed. He swallowed hard. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Why? Judge Caprio tilted his head slightly. Why what? Why would you help me? After what I said, after I threatened you and your family, why wouldn't you just send me to prison? I deserve it. Quote. The judge was quiet for a long moment before answering. Do you know why I became a judge, Mr. Brewster? Marcus shook his head. Because I believe that justice and mercy aren't opposites. They're partners. Justice without mercy is just revenge. Mercy without justice is just enabling. Real justice requires us to hold people accountable while still believing they can change. And yes, you do deserve to be punished for threatening me. But I believe you also deserve a chance to prove you're more than your worst moment. Share this video with someone who believes the justice system should rehabilitate, not just punish. Because what happened next would test whether that belief was naive idealism or profound wisdom. Do you accept my offer? Judge Caprio asked again. Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, took a shaky breath, and nodded. Yes, Your Honor, I accept. I need to hear you say all of it, Judge Caprio said. I need you to tell this courtroom exactly what you're agreeing to. Marcus straightened slightly, finding some composure. I agree to pay $1,000 over 12 months. I agree to write letters apologizing to your family. I agree to attend anger management counseling for 6 months. I agree to do 100 hours of community service at Rhode Island Hospital. I agree to come back to this courtroom once a month to observe. And I agree that if I get arrested for anything, the deal is off, and I face maximum penalties. And? Judge Caprio prompted. Marcus looked confused. And what? Why are you agreeing to this, Mr. Brewster? I need to know that you understand what you're committing to. Marcus was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than it had been. Because I'm tired. I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of being in and out of jail. I'm tired of my mother looking at me like I'm breaking her heart. I'm tired of my sisters being ashamed of their brother. And I'm tired of being the guy who threatens people. I don't want to be that guy anymore. Like this video if you believe genuine remorse is the first step toward real change, because Marcus's words would be tested in the weeks and months ahead. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement. Officer Rodriguez, please escort Mr. Brewster to the clerk's office to set up his payment plan and receive his community service assignment paperwork. Mr. Brewster, your first court observation date is April 12th at 9 a.m. Don't be late. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with that distinctive crack that signals the end of a hearing. But everyone in the courtroom knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Marcus turned to leave, then stopped. He turned back to face Judge Caprio, who was gathering his files. Your Honor? Judge Caprio looked up. Yes, Mr. Brewster. Thank you. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you. Judge Caprio's face softened into something approaching a smile. Deserve's got nothing to do with it, son. This is about what you do next. Don't make me regret this. I won't, sir. I promise. As Officer Rodriguez walked Marcus out of the courtroom, the gallery erupted in whispered conversations. Sarah Chen sat frozen, her mind racing. She'd come to write a feel-good story about a compassionate judge. She was leaving with something much bigger. A story about what it means to face down a threat with wisdom instead of power. About what true courage looks like. About whether the justice system can actually transform lives or just process them. Hit subscribe if you want to know what happened to Marcus after this, because his story was just beginning. 3 days later, Judge Caprio received the first letter. It arrived in a standard white envelope, addressed in careful block letters to the Honorable Frank Caprio, Providence Municipal Court. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, the kind with 3 holes punched on the left side, clearly torn from a spiral-bound notebook. The handwriting was neat but unpracticed, the letters carefully formed like someone who didn't write often but was trying hard to do it right. It was addressed to Joan Caprio. Dear Mrs. Caprio, my name is Marcus Brewster. I am the man who threatened your husband in court 3 days ago. I am writing to tell you how sorry I am, not because the judge made me, although he did, but because when he told me about you and your tulips and your grandchildren, I realized something. I realized that I had become the same kind of person as the men who stabbed me 12 years ago. Men who don't care about other people's families or lives or fear. Men who use threats to feel powerful because they feel powerless everywhere else. Quote, I don't know if you'll ever read this letter or if you'll just throw it away. I would understand if you did. But I need you to know that I meant what I told your husband. I'm tired of being that person. My own mother looks at me with fear sometimes when I get angry, and I never wanted that. I never wanted to be the man who scares people. I wanted to be the kind of man who makes people feel safe, like your husband does. When I was standing in that courtroom making my threat, there were 47 people watching. Not one of them was scared for me or on my side. They were all scared of me. That's when I knew I'd lost my way completely. Drop a comment telling us what you think about Marcus's letter, because the authenticity of these words would be tested by actions in the weeks ahead. Your husband told me that real power is choosing to be better than your worst moment. I think about that every day now. I think about it when I wake up angry, when I want to lash out, when I feel that old familiar rage building, and I try to make a different choice. I'm writing separate letters to your children and grandchildren. I don't know if they'll ever read them either, but I need them to know that the man who threatened their safety is trying to become someone different, someone who would protect them instead of scaring them. I know I have no right to ask you for forgiveness, so I'm not asking. I'm just telling you that I see you now. I see that you're real, that you matter, that you didn't deserve to have your peace disturbed by a stranger's anger. And I'm sorry. Sincerely, Marcus Anthony Brewster, Judge Caprio, brought the letter home that evening. He sat at his kitchen table, the same table where his family had shared thousands of meals over 37 years, and read it aloud to Joan. She listened quietly, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, steam rising in the early evening light filtering through the window above the sink. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Do you believe him?" she finally asked. Frank folded the letter carefully, placing it back in its envelope. "I don't know yet, but I believe he wants to believe himself. Sometimes that's enough to start with." Share this video with someone who understands that change is a process, not a moment. Because Marcus's journey was about to get harder before it got easier. The first anger management session took place on March 23, 2023, 8 days after the courtroom confrontation. The counselor was Dr. Patricia Emanuel, a clinical psychologist who'd been working with court-ordered clients for 19 years. Her office was in a converted Victorian house on the east side of Providence, painted sage green with white trim, 3 blocks from Brown University. The waiting room smelled like lavender from a plug-in air freshener. Marcus sat in a chair by the window, his knee bouncing nervously, watching students walk past on the sidewalk outside. Young people his age, living completely different lives, carrying textbooks instead of court orders, planning futures instead of surviving presents. Marcus? Dr. Emanuel stood in the doorway. A woman in her mid-50s with short gray hair and kind eyes behind trendy rectangular glasses. She wore a purple cardigan over a white blouse, black slacks, and sensible flats. "Come on back." The session did not go well. "I don't need this," Marcus said 15 minutes in, his arms crossed defensively. "I'm not some out-of-control crazy person. I just got mad." "People get mad." "You threatened a judge and his family," Dr. Emanuel said calmly, notepad resting on her lap. "That goes beyond getting mad. That's a choice to use intimidation and fear as weapons. Tell me about that choice." "I didn't choose nothing. It just came out." "Did it? Or did you walk into that courtroom already planning to say something intimidating if the judge didn't rule the way you wanted?" Quote, the question landed like a punch. Marcus's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then help me understand. Walk me through that morning. What time did you wake up? Like this video, if you've ever had to face uncomfortable truths about yourself." Because Dr. Emanuel was about to dig into places Marcus had kept locked for years. For the next 40 minutes, she walked him through every detail of that Tuesday morning. What he'd been thinking when he woke up, the anger he'd felt before he even got out of bed, the way he'd rehearsed confrontational things to say on the bus ride to court, the intentional decision to look up Judge Caprio's address on Google Street View the night before. "You planned it," Dr. Emanuel said, not accusatory but factual. "You armed yourself with information specifically to intimidate. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment reaction, Marcus. This was premeditated intimidation. Do you see the difference?" Quote, Marcus said nothing, staring at his hands. "I'm going to give you homework, Dr. Emanuel said, scribbling on a small notepad. She tore off the sheet and handed it to him. Before our next session, I want you to write down every time you feel angry this week. Not the times you act on it. Just the times you feel it, what time it was, what triggered it, what you wanted to do, what you actually did. Can you do that? Marcus took the paper without looking at it. Sure, whatever. Marcus. Her voice was gentle but firm. Look at me. He did, reluctantly. Judge Caprio gave you a gift you didn't deserve, and probably wouldn't have gotten from any other judge in Rhode Island. But here's what you need to understand. This counseling isn't for him. It's not even for the court. It's for you. I can't make you change. I can't make you want to be different. But if you actually do want to be different, like you told the judge, then you have to do the work. And the work starts with being honest about who you are right now. Not who you want to be, who you are. Can you do that? Quote, hit subscribe if you think Dr. Emanuel's approach is what Marcus needs. Because the work of transformation was about to force Marcus to confront demons he'd been running from for 12 years. Marcus left that session angry, crumpling the homework assignment into his pocket. He walked the 43 blocks back to his apartment rather than taking the bus, needing the movement to burn off the frustration. But that night, sitting alone in his studio apartment on the second floor of a converted triple-decker on Hayes Street, he pulled out the crumpled paper and smoothed it on his small kitchen table. He found a pen. He started writing. Tuesday, March 23rd, 9:15 a.m. Triggered by waking up. Wanted to punch something. Actually did nothing. Just laid there feeling it. Tuesday, March 23rd, 10:47 a.m. Triggered by counselor asking questions I didn't want to answer. Wanted to walk out. Tell her to fuck off. Actually did. Stayed. Answered some questions. Felt like shit after. Drop a comment if you've ever done the hard work of tracking your own emotions. Because this simple exercise was beginning to create awareness Marcus had never had before. By the end of the week, he'd filled 3 pages. Front and back. He was angry, he discovered, between 8 and 12 times per day. Sometimes more. Triggered by everything. Someone walking too slow on the sidewalk. A commercial on TV. His upstairs neighbor's footsteps. The memory of past hurts. The shame of current circumstances. The fear of unknown futures. His second session with Dr. Emanuel went differently. I did the homework, he said, handing her the pages before he even sat down. She took them, surprise flickering across her face. She read in silence for several minutes while Marcus sat across from her, his leg bouncing again, hands clasped between his knees. This is excellent work, Marcus, she said finally. Really excellent. Do you notice any patterns? Quote, yeah, he said quietly. I'm angry all the time, like all the time, even when nothing's happening. What do you think that anger is protecting you from? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean protecting? Anger doesn't protect nothing. It just destroys. Actually, anger is almost always a protective emotion, Dr. Emanuel said, leaning forward slightly. It usually covers something else. Fear, hurt, shame, grief. What do you think your anger is covering? Share this video with someone who needs to understand that anger is often just pain-wearing armor, because Marcus was about to crack that armor for the first time. I don't know, Marcus said, but his voice wavered. I think you do, Dr. Emanuel said gently. Take your time. The silence stretched. Marcus's legs stopped bouncing. His breathing became uneven. I'm scared, he finally whispered. All the time. I'm scared. Of what? Of being hurt again. Of being weak. Of people seeing that I'm weak. Of ending up dead in an alley somewhere like I almost did. Of never being nothing more than this. Of being 32 years old with a record and no future and no way to fix it. Of disappointing my mother one more time. Of my sisters being embarrassed to say they're related to me. Of dying and nobody giving a shit, except being relieved I'm gone. The words tumbled out, each one tearing something loose inside. By the end, Marcus was crying, not the restrained tears from the courtroom, full, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and long buried. Dr. Emanuel let him cry. She didn't try to comfort him or tell him it was okay. She just sat with him in his grief until it passed. Like this video if you believe the bravest thing anyone can do is face their own pain. Because this moment of vulnerability was the real beginning of Marcus's transformation. When Marcus finally composed himself, Dr. Emanuel handed him a box of tissues. That's the real you, Marcus, not the threatening guy in the courtroom, not the tough guy with 17 arrests. That right there. The scared, hurting human who doesn't want to live like this anymore. That's who we're working with. And here's what I want you to understand. That person? He's not weak. He's strong enough to feel, strong enough to cry, strong enough to tell the truth. That's real strength. Marcus wiped his face, embarrassed but somehow lighter. It doesn't feel strong. It feels like breaking. Breaking open isn't the same as breaking down, Dr. Emanuel said. Sometimes we have to break open to let the real healing start. You've been holding this together with anger and threats and intimidation for 12 years. How's that working for you? Marcus almost laughed, despite himself. It's not. Right. So maybe it's time to try something new. For your next homework, I want you to do something that's going to feel uncomfortable. Every night before bed, I want you to write down 3 things. 1 thing you're grateful for, 1 thing you're scared of, and 1 thing you want to be different. Will you do that? Hit subscribe because Marcus's journey is about to intersect with Judge Caprio's in an unexpected way. Marcus agreed. And for the next 3 weeks, he did the homework faithfully. He attended his weekly sessions. He made his first payment on his fine $84 in small bills that he'd saved from his part-time job at a warehouse. And on April 12, 2023, exactly 28 days after his courtroom threat, Marcus walked back into Judge Caprio's courtroom for his first observation day. He arrived 15 minutes early, finding a seat in the back row of the gallery. The courtroom looked different when you weren't the one standing at the defendant's table. Bigger. More intimidating, but also more human. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Caprio entered and the bailiff called, "All rise." Marcus stood with everyone else, watching the judge settle into his chair, pull on his reading glasses, and begin reviewing the morning's docket. The first case was called. A young woman, 24 years old, charged with driving with a suspended license. She stood nervously at the defendant's table, her hands shaking. Judge Caprio listened to her explanation. Her license had been suspended for unpaid insurance. She couldn't afford insurance because she'd lost her job. She couldn't get to interviews for new jobs without driving. She'd been caught driving her mother to a medical appointment. "So you were trying to help your mother," Judge Caprio said. "Yes, Your Honor. She has diabetes. She had an appointment with her specialist in Warwick. I didn't know what else to do." Drop a comment telling us what you think the judge should do. Because Marcus was about to witness the same compassion he'd received, extended to someone else. Judge Caprio was quiet for a moment, reviewing the file. "How much is the fine for driving with a suspended license, Clerk Matthews?" $300, Your Honor. "And the insurance lapse?" $150, Your Honor. So she's looking at $450, plus the cost of getting her insurance reinstated and her license back. "Yes, Your Honor." The young woman's shoulders sagged. Marcus watched her face crumple, watched her try to hold back tears. "Here's what we're going to do," Judge Caprio said. "I'm going to reduce your fine to $0. The young woman's head snapped up. "What? You heard me correctly. $0. You were helping your mother get to medical care. That's what children should do. I'm not going to punish you for that. Case dismissed. Get your insurance reinstated. Get your license fixed. And don't let this happen again." The woman started crying, thanking the judge over and over. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. He'd received mercy, but seeing it extended to someone else, seeing that it wasn't just about him, that this was who Judge Caprio was consistently, not just when he felt generous, it meant something. Share this with someone who needs to see that consistent compassion changes the world. Because Marcus was learning that Judge Caprio's offer hadn't been about him being special. It had been about the judge being principled. 4 more cases that morning. A parking ticket, a noise complaint, a minor traffic violation, an unleashed dog citation. Judge Caprio handled each one with the same combination of accountability and compassion. He reduced fines for people showing genuine hardship. He held firm on penalties for people showing arrogance or disrespect. He listened, really listened, to stories and circumstances and lives. When court adjourned at 11:30, Marcus didn't leave immediately. He sat in the back row, processing what he'd seen. "Mr. Brewster?" Marcus looked up. Officer Rodriguez stood a few feet away. "Yes, sir?" "Judge would like to see you in his chambers, just for a minute." Marcus's heart rate spiked. Had he done something wrong? Violated some term he didn't understand? He followed Officer Rodriguez through a side door, down a short hallway, to an office with the judge's name on a brass plate. Judge Caprio sat behind an old wooden desk covered with files and photographs. Pictures of grandchildren, a wedding photo that looked 40 years old. A framed quote that read, "Justice is the constant and perpetual desire to render to each his due." "Mr. Brewster, thank you for coming," Judge Caprio said, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit." Marcus sat, his hands gripping the armrests. "You're not in trouble," the judge said, apparently reading his body language. "I just wanted to check in. How are things going?" Like this video if you believe following up matters. Because Judge Caprio didn't just hand out mercy and forget about people. He followed through. "Good, Your Honor," Marcus said. "I've been going to counseling, Dr. Emanuel. It's hard, but it's good. I made my first payment, and I've been doing the homework she gives me." "I'm glad to hear that. And your community service at the hospital, have you started that yet?" "Yes, sir. Started last week. I'm working in the transport department. Wheelchair escorts, moving patients between departments, that kind of thing." "How's that going?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "It's weird, Your Honor, seeing all these sick people, kids with cancer, old people who can barely breathe, people after surgeries, all bandaged up. It makes me think about when I was there, after I got stabbed. I was so angry back then. At everything. At the men who stabbed me. At the nurses who couldn't make the pain stop fast enough. At my mother for crying. At God for letting it happen. But now I'm on the other side, helping move these people around, and I see how tired the nurses are. How hard they work. How much they care. I don't know. It's different, seeing it from this side." Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "That's called empathy, Mr. Brewster. That's the thing that changes us from people who hurt others into people who help them. You're developing empathy. That's progress. Hit subscribe if you believe empathy is learned, not just born. Because Marcus was proving that even people who've lost their compassion can find it again. "I got a letter from my sister Keisha yesterday," Marcus said suddenly. "The one in criminal justice school?" "Yeah. She said she heard what happened in court. Someone posted about it online. She said she was proud of me. First time she said that in, I don't even remember, maybe ever." Marcus's voice caught. "I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until she said it." "What are you going to do with that feeling?" Judge Caprio asked. "What do you mean?" "You have a choice now, Mr. Brewster. You can use that validation as fuel to keep changing, or you can rest on it and stop doing the work. Which will it be?" Quote. Drop a comment predicting which choice Marcus will make, because the next 3 months would answer that question. The answer came in actions, not words. Marcus attended every counseling session, all 26 of them over 6 months. He completed his 100 hours of community service at Rhode Island Hospital, then volunteered for another 50 hours unpaid. He returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom every month, sitting in the back row, watching, learning. He wrote all 7 letters he'd been ordered to write. To Joan Caprio. To the judge's children, Michelle and David. To his grandchildren, Marco and Sophia. But he also wrote letters he hadn't been ordered to write. To his own mother, apologizing for years of disappointment. To his sisters, telling them he was trying to be someone they could be proud of. To his younger self, the 16-year-old who'd stolen a toy dinosaur for his sister's birthday, telling him that the hard things coming wouldn't break him forever. May became June, became July, became August. The tulips that Judge Caprio had planted did come up, yellow and red and white, nodding in the spring breeze on Heritage Drive. Marcus never drove past the house to see them. He deleted the Google Street View image from his phone. He didn't need to know where the judge lived anymore. He was learning where he himself lived, emotionally and psychologically, and that was a more important address to memorize. In mid-July, something happened that would test everything Marcus had learned. He was at the corner store on Broad Street, 3 blocks from his apartment, buying milk and bread. It was 11:30 on a Thursday night. He was tired from a double shift at the warehouse, his shoulders aching, his mind on getting home and sleeping. 3 men came in. Marcus recognized one of them immediately. Carlos Mendez, one of the men who'd stabbed him 12 years ago. The man had been arrested 6 months after the attack for an unrelated assault. Marcus had seen his mugshot, memorized his face, fantasized about revenge for years. Share this video with anyone who's ever faced their demons, literally, and had to choose who they'd become in that moment. Because Marcus was about to make a choice that would define everything. Carlos didn't recognize him. 12 years changes faces. And Carlos was high, his eyes glassy and unfocused, laughing too loud at something one of his friends had said. The old Marcus would have confronted him, would have attacked, would have ended up arrested, or worse. The rage was still there, rising hot and familiar in his chest. Dr. Emanuel's voice echoed in his head from a recent session. Anger is information. It tells you something matters. But you get to choose what you do with that information, feel it, acknowledge it, then decide who you want to be. Marcus paid for his milk and bread. He walked out of the store. He walked the 3 blocks home. He went inside his apartment. And then he sat on his couch and called Drive, Emanuel's emergency line. She answered on the 3rd ring. Marcus, what's wrong? I just saw one of the men who stabbed me. He told her what happened, what he'd wanted to do, what he'd actually done. I'm proud of you, she said. I know that doesn't make the feelings go away, but you made a different choice. Do you understand how significant that is? It doesn't feel significant. It feels like I'm a coward. You're not a coward. You're a man who's strong enough to walk away from violence even when you'd be justified in responding. That's not weakness, Marcus. That's evolution. Like this video, if you believe walking away from a fight sometimes takes more courage than starting one. Because Marcus was learning that real strength looks nothing like what he'd thought for 32 years. The next day, he told Judge Caprio about it during his monthly observation visit. The judge listened without interrupting, then sat back in his chamber's chair, his fingers steepled in front of his face. Do you know what the greatest victory is, Mr. Brewster? What? It's not defeating your enemy. It's becoming someone your enemy can't defeat by making you into something you don't want to be. That man stabbed you 12 years ago. He injured your body. But you've been letting him injure your soul every day since by carrying that rage. Last night, you took your soul back. That's the real win. Hit subscribe because Marcus's final court appearance with Judge Caprio is approaching, and what happens will surprise everyone. September 15th, 2023. 6 months to the day after Marcus had stood in that courtroom and threatened Judge Caprio's life. He returned for what was supposed to be his final observation day. But this time, when court adjourned, Officer Rodriguez approached him with a different message. Judge wants you at the bench, not in chambers. Marcus's stomach dropped. Why? Did I do something wrong? Just go. Heart pounding, Marcus approached the bench. Judge Caprio looked down at him over his reading glasses, his expression unreadable. Mr. Brewster, I've received reports from Dr. Emanuel about your counseling sessions. I've received documentation from Rhode Island Hospital about your community service. I've received your letters, and I've watched you sit in my courtroom once a month for 6 months. Do you know what I've observed? No, Your Honor. I've observed that you always arrive early, that you watch every case intently, that you treat the court officers with respect, that you've never missed a payment, that you've done everything I asked of you and more. So here's what I'm going to do." Judge Caprio picked up his gavel. Marcus braced himself, unsure what was coming. "I'm terminating your remaining fine balance. You've paid approximately $500 of the $1,000 I ordered. I'm canceling the remaining $500. You've earned it." Marcus's eyes widened. "Your Honor, I'm not finished. I'm also going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to seal the record of your threat against me. It will no longer appear on background checks. As far as the legal system is concerned, it didn't happen. You'll still have your prior record, but this case is erased. Drop a comment telling us if you think Marcus earned this mercy, because Judge Caprio's final gesture was about to get even more surprising. Finally, I want to tell you something. When you stood in this courtroom 6 months ago and threatened me, you gave me a choice. I could respond with power or with wisdom. I chose wisdom. But that choice only matters if you prove me right. If you'd failed, if you'd gotten arrested again, if you'd quit counseling or stopped paying, my choice would have been foolish. But you didn't fail, Mr. Brewster. You succeeded, and that makes my choice wisdom, so thank you." "Thank you?" Marcus repeated, confused. "For what? For proving that mercy and accountability can coexist. For showing everyone in this courtroom, everyone who's been watching your journey, that people can change. For making me look smart." Judge Caprio smiled, the first time Marcus had seen him genuinely smile. "Don't make me regret this. Go live a life that honors what you've learned here. Share this video with someone who needs to believe transformation is possible, because Marcus's story doesn't end here. It begins here." Marcus left the courtroom that day with tears streaming down his face. But they weren't tears of shame or fear. They were tears of gratitude and possibility. Like this video if you believe second chances should be earned, not just given. Because Judge Caprio's approach worked precisely because it demanded accountability alongside mercy. In the months that followed, Marcus continued counseling even though it was no longer required. He continued volunteering at the hospital even though his hours were complete. He enrolled in community college, inspired by his sister Keisha, taking courses in social work. He wanted to work with at-risk youth, kids like he'd been. He wanted to be for them what Judge Caprio had been for him, someone who saw potential instead of just problems. 1 year to the day after his threat, March 15, 2024, Marcus returned to the courthouse unannounced. He waited until the morning session ended, then approached the clerk's office. "I'd like to speak with Judge Caprio if he has a moment," Marcus said. "It's not official business, just personal." The clerk made a call. 5 minutes later, Marcus was back in the judge's chambers. "Mr. Brewster, this is a surprise," Judge Caprio said. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's good, Your Honor, really good." "I just want you to see something." Marcus pulled out his phone and opened his photo gallery. He showed the judge a picture of himself in a classroom, sitting at a desk with an open textbook. "I'm in school, got a 3.7 GPA last semester. Taking psychology and sociology. I want to be a social worker." He swiped to another photo, him in his volunteer badge at Rhode Island Hospital. "Still volunteering, 2 shifts a week. I'm training to be a patient advocate now." Another photo, him with his mother and 2 sisters, all smiling, arms around each other. "My family. We had dinner together last week. First time in 5 years we've all been in the same room without fighting." Hit subscribe if stories like this give you hope. Because Marcus's transformation was radiating outward, affecting everyone around him. Judge Caprio looked at each photo carefully, then looked up at Marcus with glistening eyes. "I'm proud of you, son, truly proud." "I need to tell you something," Marcus said. "For years, I thought being strong meant being scary, meant making people afraid of me so they wouldn't hurt me first. But you taught me that real strength is being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Real strength is facing your demons. Real strength is asking for help. Real strength is being vulnerable enough to change." I was terrified. In this courtroom that day you gave me your offer. Terrified I couldn't do it. Terrified I'd fail. Terrified you'd see me try and fall and say I told you so. But you didn't. You just believed I could. And somehow that made me believe it too. Marcus's voice wavered but held. You saved my life that day, Your Honor, not by letting me off easy, by holding me accountable and believing I was worth the effort. I will never forget that, and I promise you I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you saw in me before I saw him myself." Quote, Judge Caprio stood, walked around his desk, and did something that violated every boundary between judge and defendant. He hugged Marcus. "You saved your own life, son. I just gave you a flashlight. You did the walking in the dark." Drop a comment sharing a time someone believed in you before you believed in yourself. Because that belief is sometimes the only thing that bridges the gap between who we are and who we could be. Marcus left the courthouse that day with something he hadn't felt in 12 years. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. The knowledge that his story wasn't defined by his worst moment, but by what he'd chosen to do after it. Sarah Chin, the reporter who'd been in the courtroom that March day, eventually published her story. It went viral, just as everyone had known it would. 17 million views in the first week. Thousands of comments. People debating whether Judge Caprio had been wise or foolish. Whether Marcus had genuinely changed or just gotten lucky. But the people who actually knew the story, the people who'd watched it unfold over months rather than reading about it in 5 minutes, they knew the truth. Transformation is possible, but it requires two things that our culture often treats as opposites: mercy and accountability, grace and consequences, belief and expectation. Judge Frank Caprio provided all of those to Marcus Brewster on March 15, 2023, and Marcus, to his eternal credit, rose to meet them. Share this video with someone in a position of authority who might need to be reminded that their power is most effective when tempered with wisdom. Because Judge Caprio's response to "I know where you live" became a masterclass in what justice can look like when it's administered by someone who understands that punishment and transformation aren't the same thing. 2 years later, Marcus graduated with his associate degree in social work. Judge Caprio attended the ceremony, sitting in the audience with Marcus's family. When Marcus crossed the stage to receive his diploma, he looked directly at the judge and mouthed 2 words: "Thank you." Judge Caprio nodded once, his eyes glistening with tears he didn't bother to hide. After the ceremony, a young journalism student approached the judge. "Sir, can I ask you a question? Weren't you afraid that day, when he threatened you?" Judge Caprio considered the question carefully. "Of course I was afraid. I'm human. But I've learned that fear is just information, like anger. It tells you something matters. The question is what you do with that fear. Do you let it make you cruel? Do you use your power to crush the person who scared you? Or do you recognize that hurt people, and try to break that cycle?" Like this video if you believe Judge Caprio's philosophy should be taught in every law school in America. Because what he did that day transcended law. It reached into the realm of wisdom. But what if he'd failed? The student pressed. What if he'd gotten arrested again or hurt someone? Wouldn't you have been responsible? Responsible for giving someone a chance? Yes. Responsible for the choices they make after that? No. We can't let fear of failure prevent us from offering hope. If we do, we guarantee the outcome we're afraid of. People become what we expect them to become. I chose to expect better from Marcus, and he rose to that expectation. Could he have failed? Absolutely, but he didn't. And now we both get to live in a world where transformation won rather than despair. The student scribbled notes furiously. "One more question, sir. Would you do it again? If another defendant threatened you tomorrow, would you make the same choice?" Judge Caprio smiled, that grandfatherly smile that had become famous to millions. "I'd have to evaluate each case individually. Not everyone is ready for mercy. Not everyone is capable of change in that moment. But I'll tell you this. I'll never stop looking for the person underneath the anger. I'll never stop believing that people can be more than their worst moment. And I'll never stop offering a path forward to anyone brave enough to take it." Quote, hit subscribe if you want more stories about justice, redemption, and the courage to change. Because these stories matter. They remind us that we're not defined by our mistakes, but by what we choose to do after making them. As of the making of this video, Marcus Brewster is employed as a case manager with the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth, and Families. He works specifically with at-risk teenagers who've had encounters with the justice system. His specialty is young men with anger issues and trauma histories, young men who remind him of himself. He tells every one of them the same thing Judge Caprio told him: real power isn't in threats. It's in making the choice to be better than your worst moment. Some of them listen, some don't. Marcus understands that he can't save everyone, but he keeps showing up, keeps offering hope, keeps proving that transformation is possible by living as evidence. Judge Frank Caprio continues to preside over Providence Municipal Court. He's now 79 years old. He still wears the same reading glasses. His wife Joan's tulips still bloom every spring. His grandchildren still visit every Sunday for lasagna. And he still offers mercy, tempered with accountability to every person who stands before his bench. Because that day in March 2023, when Marcus Brewster said, "I know where you live," Judge Caprio taught us all something vital. He taught us that the appropriate response to a threat isn't always force. Sometimes it's wisdom. Sometimes it's compassion. Sometimes it's believing in someone's potential even when they've given you every reason not to. That's not weakness. That's not being soft on crime. That's being strong enough to see the human behind the offense and wise enough to know that true justice transforms rather than just punishes. Drop a final comment telling us, what would you have done in Judge Caprio's position that day? Because it's easy to judge his choices from a distance. It's much harder to make them in the moment, when fear and anger are urging you to choose power over wisdom. This story ends where it began, in a courtroom in Providence, Rhode Island, with a judge who chose mercy and a defendant who chose change. Both choices required courage. Both choices required faith. And together those choices created something our justice system desperately needs more of: hope. Thank you for watching. Share this video with everyone you know who works in law enforcement, education, social work, or any field where they have the power to make choices about other people's futures. Because Judge Caprio's example shows us that our power is most effective when we use it to lift people up rather than just hold them down. And if you've made it this far, if Marcus's story resonated with you, maybe it's because you see yourself in it somewhere. Maybe you're the person who needs a second chance. Maybe you're the person who has the power to give one. Either way, remember this: we're all one bad day, one wrong choice, one moment of rage away from being Marcus on that March morning. And we're all one act of courage away from being Judge Caprio. Choose wisely.